Started at the New York Climate March when we announced with Vandana Shiva and Rodale Institute and others the formation of Regeneration International. I think we've done really well in just 3 years. If you do Google searches back in 2014 for regenerative food farming or regenerative agriculture, you didn't find very much. You do searches now in all the major languages of the world, you'll find that this discussion is starting. Okay, but the point is, how do we bring it to the next stage? And specifically, let's talk about the U.S., how we can do this. One really unfortunate thing in the U.S. is people don't understand this basic concept yet. Okay, until millions of people understand this concept, we're not going to be able to go as quickly in the right direction as we want. Second thing is we've got a silo, single issue movement, with a bunch of leaders of these silos who are not in synergy, right? And specifically what bothers me is we got a climate movement over here whose leadership talks about nothing except 100% renewable energy and zero emissions, right? Which we all support, right? There's nothing in there about drawdown, about sequestration. They won't talk about it, yet. Okay? And then we got a food movement over here where we act like the latest, threat to organic standards, or hydroponic versus soil-based growing is the end of the world, right? No, the end of the world, it's happening right now. If we'd notice, the damn Northwest is on fire, the Gulf Coast is underwater. We're playing literally with climate roulette. We're done as a food movement if we can't stop climate change, And when you read closely, someone like Jim Hansen, Dr. Hansen, well, he's supposed to be the guru, right, of 350.org, right? He's the one who taught us all that we had to move down back to 350 parts per million of CO2 in the atmosphere. Well, read what Hansen is saying now. He's saying we can go to 100% renewable energy, and it's not going to be enough. We're done. We've baked in climate catastrophe into the system now. And what Hansen said is there's only one way we can get back down to 350, and Hansen also knows that we got to get to 280, But he says 350 to be reasonable. He said we've got to sequester, well, I thought it was 100 billion tons of carbon from the atmosphere and put it into the soil and the forest through transforming our food and farming and land use system. He said now it's 150 billion tons of carbon. This is not CO2. You multiply that by 3.67. It's just like, we are done, people, if the food movement keeps staying over here and the climate movements keep staying over here. And think about some of the other movements. What about the anti-war movement? Are we just going to have endless war forever? Are we just going to we talk about, oh man, if we could only get the state of California to put $100 million into this healthy soil initiative. It's just like we're pissing away $1 trillion a year on war and bombs. Did we forget that? Did we forget the goddamn war in Afghanistan still going on? And that the Democrats are just as bad as the Republicans? And then when you have someone like Bernie Sanders trying to stand up and say something sensible, they steal his possibility of getting the nomination. And an idiot like Trump, he picks up on that. We're going to get out of the Middle East, you know. We're going to stop the TPP. You know, it's like everything the guy says is a lie, but basically, if the peace movement doesn't start talking about the relationship between our degenerate economy, our degenerate food farming and land use system, you know, it's like, why in the hell do we have ISIS and wars in Iraq and in Syria, for example, right now? You know, why do we have a, quote, immigration crisis in Europe? Okay, well, yeah, we let them, what happened there with the Persian Gulf War, first war, 91, they made up shit, got us in there, you know, along, you know, the war started, never really ended. Well, 9/11, I won't even get into that, but a lot of people don't believe the official story. Look at the data and you'll get some questions. Bottom line is, then climate change kicks in, the worst drought they've ever had in Iraq and Syria in modern times. I mean, literally, the Fertile Crescent, you know, one of the first places where agriculture really developed, is turning into a desert. Okay, so you live in Iraq, which the U.S. has turned into hell since '71, you know, which the European Union sat by and let us turn into hell, you know. And the people can't make a living in the countryside, so they go into the cities. I mean, how'd you like to live in Baghdad, you know, as a displaced farmer, you know? And it's just like, wow, you know. And our solution is, well, you know, we're going to keep up the war, and we'll let Monsanto in there. They'll give you some seeds, advanced agriculture. Same damn thing happened in Syria, you know. It's like, because Europe and the rest of the world did not stand up to the insane foreign policy of the U.S., you know, this war, you know, the refugees spread, they make things worse in Syria because so many people are leaving Iraq and other places. The worst drought they've ever had, drives all the people into the cities. You know, you've got a repressive government in Syria that doesn't give a damn, you know, about the displaced people. You know, you have these ISIS recruiters preying upon the desperation and anger of young people, you know, and here's where we are. But I mean, it's just to make a long story short. The peace movement, every peace activist has got to become a climate activist and a food activist. Every climate activist has got to become a food activist and a peace activist. And every food, farming, and land use activist has got to connect the dots between all the issues. I mean, you're concerned about health? Well, connect the dots to this. You're concerned about justice? Connect the dots to this. You know, this is going to take a global effort. You know, and we're not messing around. This is it. You know, it doesn't mean we're going to all die from heat stroke, but, you know, when Pakistan and India reach the point where one or the other is going to get enough water to survive, you know, from the degraded ecosystem, they're going to use those nuclear weapons on one another. You know, this is it. So, very important that we start thinking holistically. You know. All right, with regeneration, there's information. Look at regenerationinternational.org if you want to see an annotated bibliography. If you feel like you need more background information, look at Biodiversity for a Livable Climate, another excellent source of information on this. But it comes down to the fact that we got to start communicating these things in a way that millions of people hear, understand, and start to act on it. Okay? And the first thing is the message, right? It's like we have got to start having a message whose tone is not gloom and doom. You know? It's like we are going to, and not just mitigate, we are going to reverse global warming. We are going to reverse deteriorating public health. We are going to reverse increasing rural poverty. We're going to decrease tension, war, strife. You know, we're going to improve biodiversity and so on. It's just like no one at this point in history is going to listen to, you know, oh yeah, if we do everything right with food and farming, we can solve 10% of the problem. I mean, there's so-called leaders in California of the Regeneration Movement saying shit like that. You know, it's like you might as well just party down. It's all over, people, if we don't reach the full capacity of regenerating our soils, you know, our lands, our forests, our you know, our political system, our souls. You know, I mean, damn, the Pope is talking about this. He's talking about we're a world of degenerates. You know, let's call things like they are. There's degenerate food farming and land use, and there's regenerative. And corporations are behaving as degenerates at this point, the big ones, for the most part. You know, and we got to change that. All right. So I'd recommend something like Jack Kittredge's white paper on regenerative agriculture. I'd recommend familiarize yourself with this group called GRAIN, G-R-A-I-N. They have a pamphlet called The Great Climate Robbery. The importance of that paper is it shows that 44 to 57% of all greenhouse gas emissions right now are from our degenerate food, farming, and land use. It's not transportation. It's not manufacturing in a generic sense. It's not our housing. You know, it's not our utilities. It's the food, farming, and land use system. It's out of control. And we're not getting to zero emissions ever, you know, and 100% renewable energy unless we change food, farming, land use. I mean, otherwise, are we talking about solar-powered chemical fertilizer plants? Is that really what we're talking about? I mean, that would be 100% renewable energy, you know. Are we going to talk about burning down the last 10 billion acres or cutting down the last 10 billion acres of forest, you know, and burning as biomass? Well, that's 100% renewable, right? No. Let's get real. And let's stand up as the food and farming movement and demand our place. We're not some second-tier issue. You know, I mean, even Bernie Sanders didn't talk about this. You know, it's like, damn it, this is a central issue, you know, and what we're doing is of central importance, you know, and just because you don't necessarily have all the politically correct attributes to your local group or your regional group or whatever, let's stand up and say it. Okay, and I just want to talk a little bit more about messaging. Let's start getting bold and positive. You know, let's start realizing that messaging is not having conferences like this for the next 10 years, once a year, and thinking we're doing our job. You know, no, messages reach millions and millions and millions of people over and over and over again. And if they don't hear this, that changes in your diet, changes in our food and farming system lie at the key of solving the climate crisis, along with 100% renewable energy. They're not going to operate on it. We need some tools to be able to spread this message, to build the coalitions we need, but we also need to have the right message and tone in the beginning. And this is not about anything other than we are going to save the world from utter catastrophe. This is part of the picture. And let's not get off on track by saying it's more important than 100% renewable energy. Hell no. We all have to be climate activists, and that's all there is to it, you know. But we all have to be food activists as well. Okay. So the problem is pretty simple. That we used to have carbon in the soil in the forest, in the pastures that we don't have now. 266 billion tons of carbon that were in the soil, that were in the forest, that were in the grasslands 12,000 years ago are not there anymore. Well, where'd they go? Well, they didn't disappear. They're up there and they're in the ocean. And if we don't get back a considerable amount of that carbon while we stop releasing methane and nitrous oxide and black soot and all the other, we're done. We're done. We are not going to stabilize the climate without this massive drawdown. Paul Hawkins' new book, by the way, is a great sort of encyclopedia of all the different methods, but it doesn't have a plan in there for how we go forward. Okay. How in the hell are we going to get, 250 tons, say, 250 billion tons back into the soils and forests and grasses over the next 25 years? The reason I use that figure is we're putting up 10 billion tons of carbon equivalent every year. 10 billion. That's what humans are doing through our fossil fuel use and through having a degenerate land use, practices. 10 billion. Well, how come if 10 billion adds up to, it translates to 5 parts per million of CO2, how come the CO2 isn't going up by 5? Well, it's because the oceans are absorbing, 2 billion tons, and the forests and the soils, even as great as they are bringing down another 1.5. So Mother Nature is already showing us that photosynthesis, and healthy soil, and intact forests and healthy forests can draw down, as she has many times over the geologic history of this planet. So what are we dealing with here? We're dealing with 22 billion acres of land that don't have enough carbon in them. This is 4 billion acres of cropland, 8 billion acres of pasture land and rangeland, and 10 billion acres of forest.
In which countries?
This is the world. This is the world. Okay. Okay, so if you got 22 billion acres to work with, and you got to be sucking down 10 billion, well, half a ton per acre on the average would do the trick, in 25 years. Well, I mean, you saw David Johnson here today. He's getting results that are 600 times what you need, if every farmer did it, right, to do this. I mean, this is not pie in the sky. I don't give a damn whether Johnson's articles have gotten into peer-reviewed journals yet. He's done it, And we have to get every farmer in the whole world to change the way they make compost and compost tea so that they can double their production, triple their production, and get he's sequestering 10.7 tons for every 2.5 acres. It's like, it's there. Farmers and producers around the world, scientists like Johnson, they've already figured out what we need to do. The point is, how do we scale it up? Okay. In the world, we got 750 million farms. 750 million farms. This doesn't mean 750 million people. It's more like 3.5 billion or 4 billion people in these households, right? All right, but where are they? Well, there's 500 million small farmers, mainly in the global south, right? There's 200 million herds people, or herders, again, mainly in the global south. And this would include small animal husbandry operations in the global north as well. And we got 50 million industrial farmers, right? These are mainly in the global north, Europe, US, Japan, other places, but it's spreading. I mean, countries like Argentina that used to be family farm grass-based are turning into giant soya plantations and CAFO operations. It's spreading. China is a developing country, but they've got 28,000 chicken farms that have 1 million chickens on each one of them. You know, just ready to produce the next bird flu that we need, right? So the solution, and these, what's interesting about the 500 million small farmers and 200 million small herds people is that they produce 70% of the world's food on 25% of the land. Okay? Well, our great industrial farmers with all their chemicals and so on control 75% of the land and produce 30% or so of the food. So who's going to drive this transformation of our system, food, farming, land use? It's the small farmers of the world. Yeah. And we need to change the big ones too. But let's get real about this. You know, it doesn't matter what we do in the U.S. It's like if we don't build a global movement and a global solidarity and a global synergy, and this means things like, oh yeah, Chinese consumers, there's more middle class consumers in China than there are in the United States. And they've developed a taste for CAFO meat, right? Cheap chicken, cheap beef, you know, dairy, and so on. Well, they're not growing enough animal feed for all these factory farms. Well, where does it come from? Well, we can get it down from South America, right? Let's whack down the whole goddamn Amazon and put GMO plantations in there, you know, so we can produce GMO soy meal for 80% goes to China, 20% goes to Europe. Well, what's at the other end of the thing? Well, the consumer goes into a restaurant in Europe or China and they get a cheap hamburger. They're not thinking about this. You know? If we don't build a global movement and a global solidarity and a global awareness of this, we're done. We're done. And the middle of this problem are factory farms. You know, there's very different ways you can look at factory farms. Well, it's GMO feed, right? It's the main use of GMOs in the world. It's the main use of farmland. In the U.S., 80% of our farmland either is grazing animals before they go off to the animal prison, the factory farm, or it's raising the grain to feed them. And if we don't take down the factory farm system, which now has 70% of the world's farm animals, we're not gonna do this. And how are we going to do this? Well, the world spends, consumers in the world today are spending $7.7 trillion on food. These are mainly people who are beyond the subsistence economy, right? But it's like, we're talking about regenerative food, farming, and land use. All right, could someone tell me what percentage of the $7.7 trillion is now produced not only organically, but regeneratively? Well, the bad news is it's not real high, that number. But the sobering fact is we are not going to achieve regenerative food, farming, and land use without a massive change in the market and people's buying and consuming habits. It's just like, you know, if we don't stop arguing where we got vegans over here saying no meat, no animal products, and, you know, and then people over here saying, oh, we can only feed the world with factory farms. You know, it's just like, no. The vegan philosophy, I was a vegetarian for 40 years before I came upon regenerative agriculture. So this is very important to me. It's the world. You know, how much factory farm meat and animal products should people be eating if they're concerned about regeneration? Well, very simple. None. None. If you go out to a restaurant, and you'd have to be upper middle class to be able to afford an organic, you know, grass-fed restaurant typically. You go to a restaurant, you better order like a vegan. You know, you better start drinking your coffee black. You know, unless you've got that alternative. So, average American's eating 10 ounces of meat a day, no one in their right mind would recommend that, you know. It's like any natural health doctor would tell you, you got to cut that by at least 70%. But what we have to say is, you got to cut your consumption of factory farm food down to 0%. Because people are going to waffle on this reducing their meat, and you know, it's just like, man, if you're eating meat, you better eat only locally produced, or where you know the farmer or whatever, that's not only organic, not necessarily certified organic, but beyond organic. You know, look for that or don't eat it. You know, and we can do this if we build a bigger coalition. The animal rights group can be really, that coalition can be really powerful addition to the climate movement, to the food movement, to the peace movement, and so on. We got to make it clear, we're very serious. We're going to shut down the global factory farm industry, and we're going to bring down the GMO feed industry and Monsanto and DuPont and Dow, you know, at the same time we do this. That's all. So let's not talk about regenerative agriculture. That's a good term to use some of the time. But what I'm saying, make sure you start saying regenerative food, farming, and land use. You know, that is the heart of our degenerate economy. And it's all those things. If consumers just sit back and you know, do nothing, we're not going to get a critical mass of acreage, you know, regeneratively managed. These ranchers, these farmers, these urban producers, they got to make a living, right? Look at dairy. Dairy's a perfect example. Dairy's a $100 billion industry in the United States, but it's also 57% of all the meat consumed. So that's another $40 billion. $140 billion industry, the dairy industry. You know, and only about 6 or 7 billion of that is organic, much less regenerative organic, you know, which is just starting. But there are some hopeful signs. I mean, you see someone, why is Stonyfield starting to offer grass-fed, you know, organic yogurt? Well, because consumers want it. Why do they want it? Because it's better for you. It's better than just USDA organic. You know, why is Organic Valley 10% or so of their dairy farmers are now 100% grass-fed dairy organic farmers? Well, because it's better for you. I mean, you might as well drink out of the toilet, you know, as drink pasteurized conventional milk, you know, pasteurized and homogenized. So we have to move this industry. We've got a current campaign started about a month ago with us and our allies against Ben & Jerry's. A lot of people said, oh, why are you picking on Ben & Jerry's? Aren't they there for campaign finance reform? They give money to immigrant rights groups. They speak out against Trump. You know, I mean, aren't they the good guys? Well, bad news. Ben & Jerry's is just another factory farm dairy operation that has hoodwinked people into paying 30% more for their ice cream than organic ice cream. You know, and so, and guess what? There is no Ben & Jerry's. Their name is Unilever, right? Unilever is the 4th largest food corporation in the world. If we're talking about regenerative food and farming, we're talking about forcing Unilever to their knees, you know, and forcing them to change. Or else we're not talking about anything, you know. Nestle's. I mean, we may not consume their products, but I think they're, along with Walmart, the biggest food operation in the whole world. So we are going to have to go after these companies, and our demand can't be any longer, oh yeah, we don't want you to use Roundup, Ben & Jerry's, because they're offering. Oh, we'll stop using Roundup, you know. No, we're not talking about that. You're using atrazine, you're using metolachlor, you're using so much goddamn nitrogen fertilizer that you can't even, you know, sit next to Lake Champlain in half of it, much less swim in it, because it smells like crap. And where's the crap coming from? It's coming from the dairy industry, you know. And so we need to strategically, as a movement, identify strategic billion-dollar corporations and move them. We got to move them from, if they're the chemical, you know, they might move to organic, you know, but the organic ones need to move to regenerative. And some of them can skip the whole process. I mean, our beef standards are terrible for organic. I mean, they're terrible. It requires a minimum of 30% of their feed be grass or forage. It's just like, you're supposed to graze them every day of the year. I mean, come on, you know. Cows are herbivores. You feed them feed, you know, especially genetically engineered feed drenched in pesticides. It makes them sick. The crap they produce makes you sick. I mean, have we noticed 40% of Americans have chronic disease now, at least one chronic disease? Have we noticed that 14% of our kids are in special education? You know, have we noticed that 9.5% have dangerous food allergies, not just minor food allergies? That 20% of our kids are not just overweight, they're obese. You know, have we noticed 1 out of every 43 boys is born with autism, which means a life sentence for the moms usually to take care of them? That 1 out of every 63 girls. You know, have we noticed that 60% of young people report they have chronic headaches, you know, and trouble, you know, just dealing with everyday life? It's just like, come on, people. Garbage in, poison is having an impact. And we've got to stop it. But we're not going to stop it one farm at a time. We're not going to stop it one consumer at a time. Part of what we have to do is go after these major billion-dollar, multi-billion-dollar multinationals, you know, and take market share away from them. Punish them until they change or go bankrupt. Yeah.
Yes.
We got about 2 minutes.
I'm just wondering about inspiring that and strengthening the voice, and to introduce that idea that being owners of those corporations is also gives us a stronger voice to hold their feet to the fire. And in fact, by doing that, you've got scalability, and also they have to listen to you because you own them.
Well,
so I mean, I think they're how to be inspired
I'm not
by you.
opposed to shareholder pressure and resolutions. We do it all the time. I mean, I own some stock in Monsanto so that we can get in there and protest at their headquarters. You know?
I'm just wondering what your inspiration, you are so inspiring, and how you put that together and think of both inspiring the smaller farmer, but also...
We got 1,500 multi-billion-dollar corporations that control the world. 1,500. Those people are they're gonna bring us all down. You know, we have got to have an economy that is not based on Walmart and McDonald's and Monsanto and that, and we're building it in every city in the country. There's 30,000 cities and towns in America. Every single one of them has an embryonic alternative food system developing. Every one of them, you know. But the problem is, this is a massive country, and we have all got to become, you know, proselytizers and educators about regenerative living. You know, there's no one else to do it, you know. You know how many elected political officials we have in America? I won't go through asking you because we are always wrong. People have no idea the scope of our political degeneration, of our corruption. We have 519,000 elected public officials and appointed public officials in the United States. And 90% of them need to be thrown out on their ass, you know, because they represent the special corporate interests. They don't represent us. But how many of us are running for office, you know? How many of us are, if you're a food activist, it's like, you know, the school board positions. These are the people who determine whether we feed poison or not to our kids. You know, what about the park boards? They're spraying Roundup. You know, they're not grazing sheep and goats yet. like the great presentation this morning, they're spraying Roundup. You know, our highway departments, they're spraying Roundup. You know, our forest systems. It's just like city councils can do a lot, county boards can do a lot, state legislatures can do a lot. Our federal government is in the hands of, you know, corporate special interests right now who are going to be very hard to dislodge them. But I'm not saying we shouldn't be political as activists, but I'm saying that let's keep it in perspective what this is all about. And I wouldn't talk in this tone and in this manner to a church group, you know. But I'm talking to you in this room because you're there already. You know, you don't need any other experts, you know, to convince you, hopefully, that this is the most exciting good news in the whole world. But it's the most exciting good news in the whole world that no one's ever heard about. All right. So I'm going to close because I need to make this point. How do we build this movement? How do we build this movement in a, you know, I'm a campaign person. You know, that's what I've done for 50 years. That's what I love doing. And there is a international climate agreement that I'm sure most of you have never heard of, that was signed at the Paris Climate Summit, December 1st, 2015. And it said, basically it's called the 4 for 1,000 Initiative. Please look this up. But look it up on regenerationinternational.org. Because the official French site is kind of impenetrable. It's not in everyday language. But what people agreed to do, which was earth-shaking if anyone had ever heard about it, is they said, not only are we going to move as quickly as possible, 2050 was what all the countries of the world agreed to 100% renewable energy, but the 4 for 1,000 initiative said, and we're going to draw down as much CO2 from the atmosphere and put it in the soil as we're putting up. And we're going to continue this for 25 years. Okay? And what are they talking about here? What's 4 for 1,000? Well, it's 0.004. All right? They're just saying if farmers on the average, these 750 million farmers I talked about, could increase the amount of carbon in their soil by 4 1,000th a year, we could start to reverse global warming over 25 years. Well, Johnson just quoted stats from his research that's 600 times higher than 0.004. So basically, we get 1 million farmers as quickly as possible adopting the David Johnson biologically enhanced agricultural management type techniques and some of the other techniques. We can make a big dent in this. But the U.S. didn't sign on, of course. 38 nations have signed on so far, and hundreds of NGOs, cities, groups like this. So this is how we go about building a local to national coalition, I believe, in the United States for drawdown, for sequestration, is we want to set as a goal, we want every city council in the whole country to sign on to the 4 for 1,000. It's a voluntary agreement basically saying we're going to change our food, farming, and land use practices so as to start drawing down as much as we can, you know, and creating healthy soils and creating a healthy environment. And it's easy to sign on to this because it's a voluntary commitment. But the importance is that once people have signed on, like Mexico, where I work half of the time, Mexico has signed on to this agreement. They didn't even realize what they were signing on to. They just noticed that the Scandinavian countries and France and some of the other countries they want to get money from had done it. But anyway, once a country signs on, it's much easier to talk about implementing it. And there's going to be a lot of help coming from foundations and individuals and crowd sharing and whatever. There's going to be money to help farmers and ranchers make this transition. But we need to first develop the awareness. So if I lived in, say, Sonoma County, what would I do? All right, Sonoma County's not signed on, you know, as green as it is. All right, I would reach out to all the food, farming, peace, you know, justice groups in the county. I would bring my Jack Kittredge white paper on sequestration, you know, the grain paper, the ETC paper called Who Will Feed Us? Amazing, amazing paper. I'd have a discussion with the Sierra Club, you know, with 350.org chapter, with the local food co-ops and that. Get them on board with the concept. And the first thing the group does when they get on board, they register with 4 for 1,000 as a supporter. So Sonoma Club, Sierra Club signs on this. After you've gotten a group together who are fired up by this idea, and believe me, they will get fired up. The problem in the activist community in the U.S., people have never heard about this, you know. I mean, I speak to church activists all the time. And it's like they're crying at the end of this talk because they thought, wow, Mr. Cummins, I thought there was no hope. And here you're saying there is hope, and we can turn it around, and it's not some, you know, it's not some high-tech thing. We already know how to do these things. Anyway, so you reach a critical mass in Sonoma County where you got your 10 or 12 groups. We're starting to communicate, you know, and then you say, you know what? Let's have a letter. Let's go into the city council, you know, or let's go into the mayor's office, you know, or let's go into the county board. Let's get them to sign on this, you know, because Trump and his junta, you know, pulled out of the Paris Climate Agreement. Doesn't mean that states, counties, cities can't do it. So get your local locality, and by then you're not going to achieve this without achieving a critical mass of a coalition, of a critical mass of understanding. You know, and once you do this, it's going to have a very big impact. It's like when Mendocino County banned GMOs. You know, it was one battle, but it was heard around the world. Okay. And I mean, you've got counties in California, like LA County. All right, LA County is like the 23rd biggest economy in the world. You know what I think? It's got a huge amount of land. I'm talking about the county, not just the city. It's got a huge amount of forests, got a huge amount of land that could be, you know, reforested, turned into urban agriculture and so on. And they got a mayor who wants to be the president. Man, let's get LA County on this. Let's get San Francisco County on this. Let's get the state of California signed on to the 4 for 1,000 so that they're sitting down with serious players in this regeneration, like Finland, the country of Finland. You know, they're testing the carbon for free on every farmer's farm in Finland. You know, they're providing technical assistance to every farmer in the whole country, you know, that wants to do this. And why would countries do this? Well, they all made the pledges for reductions in emissions, you know, several years ago. Now they're starting to realize, oh my God, we're not going to be able to pledge, you know. But if they include regenerating soils and forests, they can fulfill their pledges, you know, and more. And so I just can't stress enough that if you're excited by this conference, your job is to, you know, make sure you feel comfortable explaining this. Like I tell people, read that Jack Kittredge paper, Can Biology Do the Job? Read it once. Try to go explain it to your friends, your family. All right, if you can't explain it well, you know what? Read it again, you know, and then go do it again, you know, and start reading a few other things. And like your test, if you can be an advocate for this, is that you start to convince people. Look in their eyes, you know, when you're talking to them. You can see if you have become, you know, an advocate for regeneration. And we all have to become this. I mean, 100 and some odd years ago when the populist movement nearly overthrew the corporate, you know, dictatorship in the United States. How did they do that? Well, they had 40,000 people in the U.S. They were called circuit riders. And what these people did every day is they went out and gave talks. You know, every day, 40,000 people. You know, in places like Texas and Oklahoma and Louisiana and Oklahoma, that were the hotbeds of the populist movement. This didn't happen by osmosis. You know, people learned the issues, you know, built the local groups, went out and started educating people. You know, and we can all do this. I hope next year when we come back, we'll be able to look at that 4 for 1,000, the official French page, and we'll be able to see a lot of counties in California listed that have signed on. You know, and that we'll see some of the counties not only signed on, but these coalitions started to work together. You know, and it's like it works both ways. With the Sierra Club, we're all facing a total crisis in our single issue silos. You know, it's like by working in synergy, we can all be stronger. You know, but the main thing is we got to believe we're going to win. You know, it's like you got to have an explanation for everyday people about, oh shit, the hurricane, and you know, there's 2 more hurricanes, and what are we going to do? Well, you know what we're going to do. And we got to start telling them. We got to start organizing. And we got to do this on a global scale. We can do it. There's people all over the world. Regeneration International, for example, that we founded just 3 years ago with Vanda Shiva and a number of people from around the world. It's like there's people in 100 countries right now having discussions like this today. So you just make sure we connect the dots.